We live in very interesting times, which is something we've been exploring over the last couple of weeks. Technology has changed the kind of pace of our lives, the pace of change for a lot of us. And particularly the latest developments in artificial intelligence, or AI, are beginning to and will reshape the world in which we live. And so there's different reactions to that. On the one hand, there's the fear that the machines are going to take over and destroy us all, and wasn't it great while we were the human race? And then on the other hand, there's like, let's just go all in for all of this new technology. This is all brilliant. And I believe that as followers of Jesus, this is a key time for us to be thinking about these issues, to be talking about these issues, and bringing our wisdom and hopefully a bit of insight from Jesus into how we're supposed to respond. And it's not with anxiety and depression and all of the things that our media would encourage us to feel. So today I want us to think in a kind of slightly different angle onto it. For those that are paying attention will notice that I am doing, what was the first one we did? Attention, connection, this is production, and then next week we're doing invention, because preachers like to have things that are all lined up like that. But today we're going to talk about the world of work and productivity, and AI is already having a massive impact in the whole workplace at the moment. It's estimated that there's already been tens of thousands of jobs that have been lost to this new technology. Oddly enough, in mostly the tech companies that are producing the AI. So there's a lot of engineers who are literally working themselves out of jobs right now. That is what they're doing. And of course, the big question for us all is, what does this mean for the future? If that's the pace of change we're seeing already, what does that mean? I read some estimates this week that said that between 30 and 40% of the jobs that currently exist will be automated by artificial intelligence by 2030. So 30 or 40% of jobs will be automated. That's an estimate, of course, we're guessing into the future. But these new tools are making workers more efficient. They're bringing productivity, and some very unexpected jobs are being replaced by technology in this move. And all of us will be affected to differing degrees. Some of you will be in workplaces where you're being, AI is being kind of brought into the workplace. You're to use it as a tool. Some of you will be perhaps in an industry which is fearful about being wiped out by this new technology. Some of you might even be working on some of the new tools that are coming in. Some of you might be retired and thinking, I'm very glad that I'm not in the workplace in this current season. But I can guarantee you, whatever your position today is, you're going to be affected by the changes that are afoot. It doesn't matter if you're working or not working at the moment. These changes are going to affect everyone. And if there's economic disruption, which is likely as a result of this, then we will all be impacted at some level. And very much related to the whole world of work and jobs is this word productivity, which has become a bit of a buzzword in the last kind of 10, 15 years, where we now have lots of productivity influencers on the internet who their job is to try and help us all become a little bit more efficient, a little bit more productive. So everyone seems to care about becoming more productive as a person. Perhaps you felt that pressure as well. Can I become more productive? And you're not alone, because the UK government has got a big drive at the moment, which is we want the UK as a whole to be more productive. Because looking at stats, I'm not sure, maybe Jack or someone could tell me how they work this out, but productivity is measured by the amount of output for the hours that someone works. And so they work it out for the whole nation. And the UK is one of the least productive nations in the G7, in the top 7 economies in the world. So the government really cares about productivity right now. How can we be more productive? And a lot of them, it's interesting, the government's kind of pinning a lot of hopes on AI, that AI is going to make us more productive as people. And somehow the average worker will suddenly find their groove with AI and become much more efficient and much more productive, whilst at the same time people are losing jobs. So I'm not quite sure how all that is supposed to kind of fit together, but that's the world in which we live. And there's very much this dream of unlimited growth that every nation kind of assumes that we can continue to grow and grow and grow and grow, and that will solve all of our problems, and everything will be fine if we just keep growing. But what does Jesus have to say to all this? Like, why are we talking about technology and AI and stuff in church? We're supposed to be talking about Jesus and spirituality and the Bible and all of that, aren't we? Well, I believe Jesus has things to say into these topics, because these topics reach to the very heart of what it means to be human what it means to be a person, and what it means to be alive in our culture. We need to avoid, on one hand, the panic, but we also need to avoid the apathy, which says whatever goes. So once again, today I want to ground us right back in the very beginning of the story from the Bible. We're going to be in the creation narrative. This is such a kind of well-known story, but also full of such depth in terms of what does it mean to be human. So we're going to be looking at, in particular, about the whole area of work, productivity. So we're in Genesis 1:26. We'll put the verse up on the screen here. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, over all the creatures that move along the ground." So this is the beginning where God creates mankind. We've had the whole creation narrative where all these different bits of creation are created, and then we come to humankind. And we see here that we're created with a purpose, and that purpose is first and foremost to be made in the image of God. We're not created to sit around on some sort of everlasting meandering holiday. We're actually made for a purpose, and that purpose includes work. And this is why we all need to have a sense of purpose in our lives. You know, we know very clearly that when people lose a sense of purpose in their lives, that's often where they don't want to live any longer. When they lose a sense of why do I exist, and there's lots of people struggling with that, and it's because we've lost a sense of purpose. We've been disconnected from why we were made. But we're invited right from the very first chapter of the Bible to be involved in a huge purpose. We're made in the image of God, and our first job or role that we're to play is to reflect the image of God back into the world. This is the original vocation that we're given in the Bible, is to reflect God back into the world. And of course, as part of this, it says that we're to rule. Now, this idea of ruling over creation can be misinterpreted. It's easy for us to think about ruling over creation as some sort of domineering, kind of authoritarian approach. Like, you know, the people who really want control, the ones you don't want to give control to. There's that sense of, like, we could just control everything. But actually, it's important we see the context here, which is we're to rule over in the image of God. In other words, how does God rule? That's the way in which we're to rule in creation. That means ruling with mercy, with compassion, with care, with attention, with creativity, and with love. So we're given this job of ruling. And it's also to reveal God's purposes to creation. And a very similar theme is picked up in Genesis chapter 2. We'll put the next verse on the screen. Thanks, Jake. Genesis 2:15. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. So again, this Garden of Eden, we have this picture of this beautiful kind of scenic place of tranquility. It still has work in it. It says that we're to care for it. Some other translations bring it out wonderfully, the kind of context here. The New American Standard says we're to cultivate it and to tend it. It's kind of gardening metaphors here. We're to cultivate the creation. Or King James says we're to dress it and keep it, which is an interesting phrase. We're to dress it and keep it. So the perfect garden was a place of work. We were called to oversee, to rule, to be stewards, to be custodians over creation. Our original purpose is also found in the very famous call to be fruitful and multiply. In Genesis 1:28, it says, we'll put this on the screen, God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." So again, we've got this idea of ruling or subduing creation. And then we've also got this idea of being fruitful and multiply. Now, when we think of this idea of being fruitful and multiply, we all kind of go, hee. That means have kids, right? That's what we read into this. We say, okay, being fruitful and multiply is just about having kids, procreating, making the human race bigger and bigger. I think there's something much richer in the way that the Bible talks about this than we might expect. This call here to be fruitful and multiply is a call to expand the garden. So when we read the story in creation, we have this perfect Garden of Eden, and we all focus in on that as Christians. We've got this perfect garden, this place of beauty and communion with God and harmony and creativity and joy, and we all want to be in the garden. But what is implied in the creation narrative is that the rest of creation is not the same. There's a garden, it has edges, it has boundaries, but the rest of the world is not the same. It's a place far less beautiful, a place of brokenness and hurting, a place where it feels at least that God is more distant. And of course we know what happens. Adam and Eve end up getting moved out of the garden. But this call to be fruitful and multiply is effectively a call to expand the reaches of this place of beauty, creativity, and communion with God. And how's it to work? Well, it expands organically. The way God gave us to grow was to grow through relationships and through family. Now, family is the growth method that we're given for growing and developing. And it's slow. Those of you who know family, you all know family at some level. Family can be complicated. Family can be messy. Family can be difficult at times. Of course, it can be joyful. But relationships are not a straight path for growth. They are a slower path, but they're the path in which God has given us in terms of expanding the garden here at the beginning. So my suggestion to us today is that the purpose given to all human beings is found in these little verses that we're looking at here. And they are the way in which we can frame all our thinking about work and productivity. So we'll put the 3 points up there. Very simply, the human purpose is to be an image bearer, which means to reflect God back into the world. Secondly, we're given this job of ruling over creation or caring, cultivating the world in which we live. And thirdly, we're to grow a family. We're to grow through relationships and expand the reaches of communion with God and beauty and all of that. And we know, of course, what happens when we choose other purposes. When we choose other purposes beyond God, we affect all of these. Our image of God that we reflect into the world becomes a little bit twisted or a little bit less than it should. We stop caring for our planet and bad things start to happen. We leave that place of communion with God and our family bonds get broken. This is the world in which we live. We know that all of these things get impacted by the way we make choices in our world. But understanding this big picture purpose is vital because it also helps us understand the problems that Jesus came to solve. Particularly in evangelical churches, there's this focus that comes on what did Jesus come to do, and we focus on very detailed on forgiveness of sins, which is of course at the heart of the gospel. But we make the whole thing about forgiveness of sins, and we miss that what the whole biblical narrative is taking us from a garden to a garden city at the very end. And actually what Jesus came to do was to restore the things that were lost at the beginning. This place of Garden of Eden becomes the model for the new heavens and the new earth at the very end. And so we need to understand these purposes we were created for, because what Jesus came to do is restore these purposes in us. So in your salvation to Jesus, all of these things are restored. And we can get a bit caught up in the mechanics of it, but this is now who we are. We're a new creation people, as the Bible talks about in the New Testament. We're those who are now, again, to reveal God back into the world, restoring the image bearing that we have always been made for. We're now to rule over creation wisely and bring creativity in how we do that. And we're to continue to grow a God family to fill the earth. The whole idea of family is rich throughout the New Testament, and it's about bringing us back to that original purpose. So when it comes to our work and purpose, every job you do, every task you do, everything you do volunteer-wise, all the things you do that are in some ways helping towards these purposes fit within this vision. Every job you do or ever will do, if it's God-honoring, will fit into all of these categories. And I think it's time sometimes for us to get a kind of God-sized vision about what we do with all our time. So if we go to the next slide, We need a God-sized vision for our work. And I don't just mean those who are still in the traditional workplace, because this idea of retirement is a fairly new, modern invention. But you're still doing things. You're still involved in our world. You're still playing a vital role, whether you're retired or whether you're working. But what's the God-sized vision? Where does the work that you do fit within God's purposes? And I trust you trust me when I say that all of them, all the jobs fit into this. There's no such thing as a secular job. There's no such thing as this sacred secular divide that we sometimes create in our minds. All of our work can be for God in all of these categories. You may work in economics, but you're revealing God to the world, you're helping steward resources, and you're building a God family. You may work in a shop, but you reveal God to the world, you steward creation, and you're building a God family. You may sit in an office, but you're revealing God to the world, helping steward the resources of our world, and you're building a God family. All of our purposes and jobs fit within these purposes. So maybe you've lost sight of that. Maybe your workplace or the thing you do with your time, you've lost sight of the role that you're currently playing. And so I want to begin by grounding us in that original purpose and narrative and place of work before we now talk about the current culture in which we live. How are we going to respond to the changes that are coming in our culture? So let's look at where we're at. We'll go to the next slide. We're living in an increasing AI workplace, a place where AI is getting brought in at every level. And the first thing to say about the culture and the times in which we live is that this is not the first time that technology has revolutionized the workplace. There have been other situations. We had obviously the Industrial Revolution, which was massive, where farm laborers were then moved to becoming factory workers. The introduction of the widespread computer in like the 80s, 70s, 80s reshaped the way that an office looked. We've had, of course, the closing of steel mines and coal mines in the UK. Again, in the 60s, 70s, the changes in our culture have happened before. It's estimated that there's 60% of the jobs that exist today did not exist in 1940. 60% of the jobs that exist in the market today did not exist in 1940. So we live in a very different world. So historically, this is not new. However, one of the things that might be new is the pace of change. This is happening faster and faster than some of these other changes were brought in. And sadly, in each of these past moments, we can look and we can see there's been job losses and there's been a lot of pain and a lot of upset. And in each of these cases, eventually new jobs appear, new opportunities appear. But that's not exactly great news for the people who are caught in the middle of it. The people who have to suddenly retrain. That's not as simple a process as saying, come on, everyone, just retrain. There's a whole kind of messy middle that happens. But one of the things that is different in this reshaping of the job market that's happening at the moment is the jobs that are being affected. So previously it's been low-income jobs that have been the first to be affected. But what's happening at the moment is it tends to be the professional roles that are seeing the first impact of AI coming in. So it's not the miners, the steel workers, or the typists in office. It's actually the lawyers, the programmers, the data analysts, and the financial services which are seeing the first impact on all of this. Why would you hire an expensive lawyer if you can talk to a chatbot which has read every legal document in the whole world? And this is the kind of world in which we currently live. Some of you will know I do websites. I work for the church, but I also do websites. And occasionally I have to get into the code and figure out a problem that's going on with a site. And I can either spend an hour trying to figure it out myself, or I can say to some chatbot, here's the problem, and it'll say, here's the most likely problem. And I'll go, oh, yes, you're right, that works. So, of course, people are going to adopt things that are quicker and faster in this sense. But where is this technology taking us? Because I want to do a kind of very brief explainer for those who don't follow all this stuff. One of the things that's being pushed at the moment is something called AGI. I don't know if you've heard of this. If we go to the next slide, which stands for Artificial General Intelligence. So technology companies right now are pushing towards this as their goal. This is the primary purpose in which a lot of these companies exist. And the goal is to create a computer which is, and the definitions are quite woolly here, but the goal is to create a computer which is comparable to a human, what a human can do in general tasks. And they reckon that once they get to that point, it will mean that lots of jobs will suddenly fall away because a computer can do them. That's what they're working towards. And one of the most horrible definitions I've heard for it is AI will be able to do any economically valuable activity, which is a bit of a horrible task, because when you actually stop and think about all the things that happen in our world, the most important jobs, I would suggest to you, or roles in our world are not economically valuable. Think of caring professions. Think of childcare, raising children. Think of care homes with the elderly. Think of ecological work in our world. Think of education. Think of healthcare. You can frame all of these in economic terms, but I don't think you could call them economically valuable. And so the question comes for us, if this is the speculation that AGI is going to make us smarter and smarter, so we don't need people to do jobs, what are we going to do? And some predict that when we reach this point in technology that we'll all suddenly be on some big leisure break, we'll all be on holiday, none of us will need to work, we'll be sipping cocktails on the beach and enjoying the good life. I think there's probably a lot of problems with that. I think it's pretty flawed. Fundamentally, we are created for purpose, and we all desire to have something to do, and I don't think most of us, beyond kind of giving ourselves a long holiday, would actually want to sit around and do nothing for the rest of our lives. And in the 1960s, they had all these predictions about technology which suggested that we were going to all move towards leisure. There would be 1 or 2 days of work if we have to, and we'd all be sitting around. That's what they predicted. And that prediction was about 20 or 30 years ago. They figured that the growth of technology was going to mean we would all just sit around and do nothing. In fact, the opposite has happened. We've got busier, our lives are fuller. Technology has not caused us to do less, it's caused us to do more. And so I think these predictions that we're going to suddenly be sitting around are fairly flawed. And biblically, work is seen as a good thing. Work is actually seen as something that we should have a positive view on. It's just about how we frame it. And despite how we often imagine our kind of ultimate future with God, let me tell you now, it involves work. You might not have realized this. Heaven, new heavens and earth, one of the things we're called to biblically is to continue ruling with Christ. We're called to be rulers in the new heavens and the new earth. So in the eternal future we have with God, we'll be working. It just won't be the kind of work that you have maybe today. It'll be full of joy, it'll be full of purpose, and it will continue to give us life. So we need to kind of reframe how we think about work. Work is something more than just the things that we do to get paid. So I want to look at the culture we're in and how these 3 purposes I gave us earlier help us think about the current age we're in and some thoughts for us as Christians. So the first one is this idea of us being an image bearer. Our first call is to reflect God back into the world. And the amazing thing about being made in the image of God is that, one, we've got this goal to reflect it, but it also speaks to who we are as individuals. That one of the gifts that Christianity has given the world is an inherent value for humans. So in a world without some sort of grounding, it's very difficult to come up with human rights. It's very difficult to have a basis for a value for every single human life on this planet without God. Because God grounds the value of what it is to be a human in those very first chapters of Genesis. That every human, no matter how productive they are, is made in the image of God. That's the good news that we get to carry out into the world. And that is radical in our times. Much of this AI revolution that we're facing into does not have this inherent value for humans at the very core of its decision making. Rather, there's this drive for more and more, and a lot of it's money, if we're honest. The drive for money and power and just to see how far we can push technology. But we, as Christians, need to have a different approach. We don't want to have this dog-eat-dog world. As Jesus said, you cannot serve God and money. That actually serving God changes our priorities. That we don't just look after the bottom line economically. We're actually looking for human value in every single person. It's a tragedy when somebody loses their job and as a result of it loses their sense of purpose. That is something we should care about and not something we should just be flippant about and say it's okay, they'll get by. And of course, there's lots of good ways in which this technology is going to reshape the world. But all of the good ways in which this technology is going to reshape the world are where humans are put at the center and not machines. Think of healthcare. There's already been great breakthroughs in healthcare in the last few years. Drug trials that normally take between 10 and 15 years, they're going to be able to shorten them down to a few years through to advances in AI. That's brilliant. If we're able to bring new drugs into the market that are going to help people with illnesses that they're struggling today, great. But what do you see the difference? They've put humans at the center, not money, not producing more. And there's going to be lots of advances that are going to be positive, but there's also going to be lots of advances that are going to be very negative for what it means to be humans. And one of our primary roles, I think, as Christians in this day is just to say, yay, humans. Humans are good. We want to value every individual. We don't want to put machines before humans. Someone's value is not based on what they do for their job or what they produce. Because we're image bearers without doing anything. And it's the most vulnerable in our society that always struggle when we have these big changes in our culture. So think of the people who are unable to work for health reasons, who struggle with their mental health, who are neurodivergent, who think differently. How are they going to cope in all these changes? And we need to value every individual. And as the church has always been good at, we need to look after the least and the lost and the hurting and the broken and bend down and help the people who are struggling in these times. And I think fundamentally that is both because we recognize that everyone's an image bearer, but as image bearers, we're reflecting God back into the world. And we do that by loving other people. It's not difficult. We reflect God into the world by valuing other people. So we need to champion humans in a world of machines. And I think that's how we reflect God in this moment. And I think the biggest threat that we face is when we lose sight of that. We lose sight of the humans at the heart of who we are. Purpose is only found in God. It's not found in some abstract sense of working for good. There's a lot of people in our culture who are working really hard because they're trying to find something good to contribute. And they're driven to do good things, but not for the right reasons. They're driven for this desire of approval or need to be loved or all of that stuff. But only in God do we find the identity, the rooting, the establishment that we can then work from rather than having to work for something. And that's how we need to be different in the world. So that's the first one. The second one is care for creation. The second call on all of us is to steward, cultivate, and care for our world. And quite frankly, we've had a pretty bad track record since we've invented big technology. Like the last couple of hundred years, we've not done a great job of looking after the planet. And a lot of that has been to do with this drive for growth, for productivity, for whatever's new and shiny. We just run after it, and we don't think too hard about the consequences. Now, these recent developments in technology and AI have massive resource questions. The problem we face into is because things that are digital seem very abstract, is it's harder for us to see the impact of what these new technologies mean. But let me tell you, like some of the data centers that are getting built have their own nuclear power station. And so this isn't a comment on any energy philosophy, but it's just that's the amount of energy that these data centers, and there are more and more of them getting built all over the place. And I'm not some Luddite saying we shouldn't build anything, but we need to think through the consequences, because these developments are using huge amounts of water and huge amounts of electricity in a time where we're battling climate change. And so the kind of hope in vain is that eventually these systems will get smart enough to solve that problem for us. So if we just press ahead and keep building better technology, then eventually we'll solve the problem that we're creating. So it's a bit of a funny situation we find ourselves in. But as Christians, we really need to be on the ball here and aware of the resources that are directly tied to some of these new technologies. Like I say, a lot of it's very abstract. Like I remember 15, 20 years ago when cloud computing became the thing. And I remember having to explain to someone that it didn't mean that these files you had were just floating around somewhere. It meant they were just on someone else's computer. They're just on someone else's computer. And we now live in a world where all of our stuff is just on someone else's computer. It's still a computer. There's still a physical resource involved. It still takes power, still takes energy, vast security systems, and cooling systems and all of that. Just because you can't see it, the way I also think about it is like there are only a finite set of resources on our planet. We live in a world which tries to pretend that's not true. So economically, we talk about money that's disconnected from anything physical these days. So companies get valued at things that are disconnected from what they actually produce. And we create these systems that are abstractions to help us not have to think about the fact there are real resources that we're using up every day in our planet. Sorry, getting off on a wee rant there. But the climate change is a real issue that we should care about as Christians, that we should be advocating for sustainable growth. We shouldn't be trying to push ahead at all expenses, that we should be the kind of people who care about the planet. It doesn't mean that we don't invest in any new technologies or do any of that. It just means we think it through. We don't just at all costs push ahead. And we have this kind of principle in our culture, which is basically the end justifies the means, which in other words, like if we get somewhere good, then it doesn't really matter how we got there. But as followers of Jesus, that is just not the way we need to think. We need to think that the way we get somewhere is as important as where we're going. So the journey is just as important as the destination. And Jesus talks about this all over the place. If you look at the Sermon on the Mount, he's like, look at the inside, not just the outside. It's not just the behaviors, it's what's the motivation, where are we going? So I'm open to ideas in which and ways we do this as a church, but I think as individuals we need to use our voice to advocate for a more sustainable approach to technology, and just be aware of the resources that we use on a daily basis. The third principle that, or purpose that we're given is to grow family, to be fruitful and multiply. And like I say, this is more than just about having kids, or it's even more than just like this idea of biological family. Because the New Testament calls us all as believers, we get invited and adopted into a new family. So it doesn't matter your circumstances, whether you're married or single, with kids, without kids, old, young. This is the new Jesus family that we're now part of, that we get to be playing a key role in. And I think that this is going to make it a great opportunity for us in this next season. I think this is an opportunity for the church to rise up and really be the family that it's called to be. So we have a key role in being a voice for the vulnerable. We have a key role, yes, in this church. We need to be caring for one another in the midst of change and disruption. But also within our wider communities, what role can we play to help the vulnerable, to help those who might be struggling in the midst of this, those who will lose jobs, those who are worried about losing jobs, those who are just uncertain about their future. And being family means more than coexisting together. It means caring for one another, loving one another, supporting people in financial hardship. It means helping people rediscover their purpose when they get a bit lost. What is helping people work together and go, what is your purpose? How can I help you be all that you're made to be in this season? And we should be doing that for one another, but we should be doing that for those in our lives. And I believe we get to do lots of things that computers will never be able to do, like showing grace and mercy and compassion, and being family. Being family is a radical thing in our day. Across generations, across races, across every possible divide. There should be rich people and poor people and old people and young people, all generations coming together in Christ to love, be together. And I think that is radical in our day and age. And I think we double down on family. Because as I said earlier, the things that are, like, a lot of people talk about things that are economically valuable, but we need to be prioritizing things like raising kids, caring for the elderly, helping the sick, supporting the poor, befriending the lonely. And these have always, thankfully, been the hallmark of a thriving church. And so we continue down that line. And I found this idea of family as a really helpful analogy because it helps us think about growth organically and relationally rather than technologically. Because we live in a culture, like I say, that's obsessed with being productive, but I think there's a better analogy for us as believers. I believe that we're primarily not called to be productive for Jesus, but to be fruitful. Let me explain. Productivity has this focus on what do we produce? What are we producing? Executing tasks, delivering on outcomes. And it's a very technological word in a lot of ways. Sometimes in workplaces, humans are expected to operate like machines. You know, you turn them on at 9 a.m. in the morning and you turn them off at 5 p.m. And in between, you give them a whole bunch of tasks to do. Now, hopefully you don't work in an office like that, but some people unfortunately do. And we end up treating humans as though they are machines, and that's kind of the culture in some places. Productivity can be at the expense of the how we treat people and how people are valued. I think the Bible gives us that better metaphor, which is to be fruitful, not productive. And growing fruit is an organic process, as you well know. We have this little apple tree that's we've just replanted in our garden, and it's tiny, it's quite small, it's got a few tiny little apples on it, but it's only young. Eventually it will grow, and it will get bigger, and it will produce more apples, because that's what apple trees do. It takes time. It needs to grow up, it needs to expand its root system, it needs to reach for the sun. When the conditions are right, it doesn't have to try really hard to grow apples. It's just part of the process. It's just what it does. Right conditions equals right outcomes. Fruit trees still produce fruit. They still have that produce word in them, but the way they produce is very different. It's very organic. An apple tree will also never produce pears. This is great learning for you today. It will produce based on who it actually is. The identity at the core of the tree is what it will actually produce. Now, we as Christians are called to be rooted in relationship with God, and the result of that living relationship with God is fruit. Not something we strive for, not something we force to happen. It's something that comes out of the conditions in which we develop in our lives. The conditions for relationship with God produce fruit. And the fruit that we produce is to make the world more like heaven. We make the world more equal, more generous, more loving, more hopeful, because we're connected to the source. And being fruitful involves treating people like God does, not just completing a task. You can't force fruit, but you can improve the conditions in which it grows. And I think that's what following Jesus effectively is. Continually putting ourselves in the places and in the conditions in which we will thrive and grow and produce fruit which impacts other people's lives. And it's not as simple as that in reality, because we are in a culture that works differently. But I think this emphasis on fruitfulness rather than productivity is a healthy mindset for us as Christians. What am I growing organically out of what God is doing in my life, rather than how many tasks can I produce? And I think if we approach this whole technological revolution we're going through with that mindset, then I think we'll be in a good place. So I've covered a lot today, and I really do think AI is going to reshape the modern workforce. It might not be as fast as some people are promising. Some people are saying it will happen immediately, but I do think it will happen. I do think the world will get reshaped by these technologies. And in the midst of it, we get to be followers of Jesus who try to be rooted and established. And I think we need to, at the core of it, hold on to those purposes God gave us. To firstly, be an image bearer. To secondly, to care for creation. And thirdly, to grow family. Everything you do fits within those categories. And in all we do, we need to be rooted in God in this season. We don't need to be fearful. We can be at peace because we're connected to the source of peace. We get to be some people who shine brightly, like the Bible talks about, like a city on a hill, like a beacon of hope. In a world of machines, we're going to champion the value of humans. Yay, go humans. In a world of limited resources, we're going to encourage us to care carefully for resources, for creation. And in a world that leaves people behind and doesn't really care, we're going to invite them into a family. And that's what I think we're called to be in this season. So let me pray for us, and then I'm going to hand back to Joe. God, I pray for wisdom in this season, God. And I thank you that you give us purpose. You call us as image bearers to be those rooted in you. And I just pray right now that as a church body, you would speak to us about ways in which you call us to be fruitful in relationships, the ways in which you call us to care for the vulnerable. And I pray that we really would be a place of hope and a beacon for humanity in this season. And God, where there are good tools that are going to help us, of course we say yes. But where there are things that are going to be unhealthy or not focused on human well-being, God, I pray you'd give us wisdom. And I pray that you'd help us to thrive in this season. And I thank you for the good works that you've given us to do. And I pray they would just flow out of our relationship with you today, God. Amen.